Hi, and welcome to this session on better social housing, designed and delivered. My name is Christine Murray. I'm the director of the Festival of Place and the editor-in-chief of The Developer, and I am chairing this session. Satari Nishati sadly couldn't be with us today, but I am joined by Alex Ely, founding director of May Architects, Yemi Aladarin, who is head of development at Meridian Water, and Peter Barber, who's the founder of Peter Barber Architects. And I think the starting point for this panel, as I've told them, is that if we accept that we do have a pressing need for social housing, and that social housing and affordable housing are good things that are required to alleviate a pressing housing crisis, the next question that follows is how do we deliver more and better quality social housing. So I think a good place to start is the view, what you are each seeing at the moment. And so we'll just kick off and have a little share. You're all three working very heavily in this area with differing experiences. And so I guess, Alex, I'll just kick off with you. What are you seeing out there right now?
Tumbleweed. So this session's called Better Social Housing Design Delivered, and let's focus on the delivery part of it, because that is what is not happening at the moment. This isn't just an emergency, it's a real national crisis. And if housing was infrastructure, we'd be treating it in the same way as we do our water, considering nationalising it. Or if our food stores ran out of food, government would be stepping in. Let's just look at the statistics. In London alone, we're supposed to be delivering 88,000 homes a year. That's the GLA's London Plan target. In 23 to 24, it was 32,000. Okay? Nearly halfway there. But the worrying thing is the following year, 24 to 25, 3,990 homes built. And the terrifying thing is it's actually getting worse this year, this financial year. So the problem is enormous, and I'm only talking about London, and I don't have the national, well, I do have the national statistics. Actually, affordable housing dropped 49% of its previous targets last year nationally. So I find it extraordinary that we're not talking about this across the press, more in debates, and Christine, thank you for kind of putting it on the agenda here, because we need to step up. And government, in fairness, are saying the right things. 1.5 million homes that Angela Rayner wants to deliver in this parliament. We're already a year in, so there's a big uphill struggle there in terms of even just catching up to where we should be, let alone to meet those targets. The National Housing Bank, I think it's called, sounds really promising. So let's see what that might deliver. I think we need to stop treating housing like it's a product and recognise it as the infrastructure that it is and needs to be. Everyone has a right, a human right to a good home and good shelter, safety and security for their families. And design-wise, as design's on the agenda, we need every solution everywhere. So as a practice, we've been involved in small infill housing on leftover land. Local authorities have lots of it. We've been involved in big estate regeneration, failed post-war neighbourhoods that are beyond their usable life that can be intensified. We've been involved in urban intensification, urban renewal, edge of town settlements, even putting forward proposals for new towns. And again, I think this month we should be hearing from the New Towns Task Force about their plans and where they're going to happen. But really, we need all those solutions at a pace. And that needs all the industry to step up. There's no shortage of design talent. There is a shortage of suppliers, and one thing the government is rightly talking about is diversifying the supply chain, increasing the number of SMEs that can build, increasing the routes to market for self-build, for custom build, for co-housing, for co-living, for cooperatives. I think that is healthy, but let's see the proof of how that actually happens. So it seems like it's been getting harder, not easier, over the last couple of years. We'll probably come back to a discussion about the building safety regulator and how that's affected sort of the pipeline of work in London, notably. 2 years ago, pretty much housing, certainly anything above 6 stories, just stopped and ground to a halt. And it's really only just starting to nudge forward. I'm a big advocate of design standards. We wrote the Mayor of London's housing design standards, which were a game changer in terms of the quality of housing across London. For the first time since Parker Morris, we had space standards introduced as mandated, as a minimum. That helped us catch up with our European counterparts in terms of quality of housing. But it feels like even since then, since 2010, when that was published, there's been a gradual increase and accretion of additional extra demands that's made it even harder. And design and build is becoming ever more complex. And whilst I really believe we do need that safety net of good standards, we need to push greater environmental standards to solve the climate crisis. I think it's become almost too complex now, and we need to kind of somehow see the wood for the trees and find a simpler way to get on and deliver good quality, but in a way that is simpler, less complex, and ultimately there needs to be more money in the system.
Yemi, I'm going to pass to you, and I wonder if you could also, as part of your viewpoint, speak a little bit to this viability crisis. Mm-hmm.
So the construction market, as I said, is at a crunch point. Delivery slowing, inflation is biting, and viability is being tested on almost every scheme. Contractors and developers are cautious, supply chains remain volatile, and too many good projects are stalled in the pipeline rather than on site. Yet the urgency to build has never been greater. More homes for net zero, for inclusive growth. Demand is rising, but delivery is not keeping up. And whilst government policy is starting to shift, so from the Renters Reform Bill to possible changes in the NPPF, the industry is still navigating uncertainty, not clarity. We need a reset. So that means facing challenges head on, the skills shortages, high interest rates, the new Building Safety Act that Alec touched on, implementing that, faster kind of planning processes as well. But it also means seizing the opportunities that are emerging. So the recent £39 billion allocation to build more affordable rented homes. It's a vote of confidence in the roles that we feel councils and housing partners can play in getting delivery moving again. We need to build on that momentum. There's also real opportunity in retrofit, in modern methods of construction, and in scaling up public-private partnerships, particularly where councils and housing associations are stepping up to build. As an industry, I think we must be clear on what we are lobbying for collectively. So a stable policy and funding framework, not just short-term pots, planning reform that speeds things up without cutting out communities or cutting out quality, a long-term housing and infrastructure strategy tied to social outcomes, not just units, and real investment in skills, sustainability, and innovation. We really can't afford inertia, but we do have reasons for optimism, I think, as well. So we need bold decisions, pragmatic delivery, and a sector that's united around the value we bring, not just in buildings, but in better places, better lives. And specifically for local authorities, we need to prove that we are not just ready to build, but we're ready to lead.
Thanks for that. Peter, would you like to share what you're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, well, okay, so, well, what I see personally is people sleeping in doorways and in subways, and the statistics, bear that sort of personal kind of experience out of hundreds of thousands of people in this city in insecure accommodation or homeless. This city being one of the richest cities the world has ever known, actually, and I think it's worth looking back. In the aftermath of the Second World War, when this country was broke, we were building 150,000 social homes a year at the same time as building a national health service. So if they could do it then, we can solve this crisis now. And I think if three things were done, we would be able to resolve the issue. I think there needs to be an end to right to buy. They've done it in Scotland, they've done it in Wales. What on earth's the point of us building social housing if a couple of years down the line it falls into the private sector? There needs to be, in the short term at least, private sector rent controls to get the situation under some kind of control. But most importantly, there needs to be an enormous social housing program run by the government. By 1977, nearly half the population of this country lived in social housing, enjoyed the benefits of living inexpensively in social housing. But the Thatcher Housing Act, the Heseltine and Thatcher Housing Act of that year effectively put a stop to large-scale building and it saw the demise of local authorities' role in creating social housing at any kind of scale, so that now is it 10%? I mean, that extraordinary achievement of the post-war generation has been trashed. But we could do it then, so we can do it now. And so there's an optimism there. We live in a democracy. We have the power to make these sorts of decisions, as Alex said, to see housing as basic infrastructure and not a product or investment vehicle. And I think, a big, you talked about a sort of a reset, and I think a reset in how we think about this, the property industry as a way of kind of making money, of advancing the economy. No, it needs to be about creating housing which is absolutely needed, and as I say, basic infrastructure and not commodity. So, I think we've left it to the private sector for too long, and that the consequences are there for us all to see. When housing was a matter, and the planning of the land economy and housing production was a matter for government, things were going much better.
There is a sense, or there is a talk of a new generation of private-public finance and partnerships. I don't know, Alex, do you want to speak to that? You'll have worked on the PFI of old. Do you see this as a promising talk, or do you actually, has the model for that, is not relevant to social housing?
I think it's part of the solution, and it goes back to my point of everything everywhere. Interesting, over 25 years of doing social housing, our client base has changed notably over the years. So early days, it was very much working for housing associations. Interesting, so 10 years ago, that as that work dropped off, it got picked up by local authorities, stepping in, taking more of a lead to deliver their own social housing. And now, you're right, it's a lot of partnerships. I think I'm keen to see more of those solutions. But interestingly, just anecdotally, I've come back from a visit to Hamburg a couple of weeks ago. And what was really striking about how housing gets delivered there is that the city take the lead. They own the land, they commission the master plans, they set the standards, and then rather than just partnering with one big joint venture partner, and then we see a drip feed of plot after plot sort of sequentially built out so that there's only just enough built to ensure that there's a market demand, there the city will parcel up development and get developers to just do a plot. So they're constantly marketing individual plots, whether that's to a registered provider or their equivalent. I don't quite know about how the affordable provision works in Hamburg, but nonetheless, the point being that they have multiple plots being simultaneously delivered by many developers. So each of those developers is taking a risk. Rather than one developer taking the risk for 1,000 homes, they get plots of, I don't know, 50 to maybe up to 100 homes. And it means that stuff happens. You know, Health and City, which is this really wonderful urban redevelopment in Hamburg, has pretty well been delivered in 10 years. Now, I'm not going to name specific projects, but we can probably all think of many projects in London that haven't moved forward from planning to even first to golden brick in 10 years. You know, we're winning recognition for schemes, which I'm hugely proud of. But when I come to meet journalists like Christine, who want to be told the story of the architecture, frankly, I've forgotten it because it's so old that I designed it 10 years ago. And yet we should have been delivering those within a couple of years. And so I think the joint venture model can work, but I would reformulate it so it's many rather than the few.
Yemi, I saw you wanted to come in.
Yes, I think it's perfect to talk about Meridian Water that Alex was also part of. So it's part of Enfield Council's Bold Solutions, one of them, to our housing, jobs and infrastructure challenge. As master developer, now owning about 87 acres, and using our land assembly powers, because I think it's important we do that. The council has amalgamated fragmented ownership to unlock delivery at scale. Enfield has invested hundreds of millions on the project to date and has been awarded a number of funding opportunities, including 195 million pounds housing infrastructure fund grant to unlock roads, bridges, parks, flood alleviation, and defences and other utilities, as well as the Meridian Water Station, which received grant for, which is really assisted in building the foundations for the target of 10,000 homes, 6,000 jobs, and other public and social infrastructure. We currently have planning for over 3,000 homes, thanks to the likes of Alex as well. And by the end of this year, we hope to have 300 homes completed on site, circa another 300 on site, and hopefully by the end of next year, we'll have another 800 on site. We've launched a skills academy and created award-winning Meanwhile use as well, because it's about community, not just the homes. We've got community gardens, but we've also appointed partners like Vistry and Taylor Woodrow to lead on housing and infrastructure delivery, whilst the council retains strategic control, process, quality, and tenure mix and kind of social outcomes. Meridian Water, I think, is working really hard to do regeneration differently, like Alex has spoken about. So public-led, socially driven, and infrastructure first. But it is hard, and we do have things like building safety gateways and the acts that are causing us challenges. But it is a model that talks about how you can create more than just buildings, but resilience and opportunities for our communities.
Peter, I think, well, both you and Alex have designed award-winning social housing of a very high standard. We see a lot of very low standard housing being delivered through permitted development and HMOs. Is that, is that something that you believe needs reining in, or do you think that enough attention is being paid really to the low quality housing that exists already?
Well, I think, Meridian Water sounds like the most, a fantastic project, and the idea that a local authority would retain control of the way that the project is going, and that the sort of social programs and the ambitions that you have are able to prevail. And I think that's the advantage of having a local authority in control of the situation, that you're not kind of it's not the lowest common denominator that you're talking about, Christine. It's that there are real aspirations which go beyond the sort of the shareholder and the sort of profit margin kind of pressure, and that's, you know, I think these things being put in the hands a lot of the time, or to a significant extent of government, means that there are higher ideals at play. And you know, we've worked with local authorities, and if you get somebody good in that local authorities, there's still a sort of residue of a welfare state kind of mentality, which means that it's just a pleasurable process. It's a fantastic process, because it's not just about the lowest, as I say, the lowest common denominator, the real aspirations, societal, you know, aspirations.
To create housing with dignity and quality.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Go ahead, Alex. You wanted to come in.
Well, I think it's interesting that Peter references the sort of local authority as a client, and there's a lot of talk at the moment about city architects. The RIBA and Felicia and I are on the housing and planning advisory group there, are promoting this idea. Peter Murray's been promoting this idea of a city architect, and you know, if that's something we could introduce nationally, sitting within the local authority, perhaps bridges between planning, between development management, effectively acting as that champion for good architecture. I think we could see perhaps the sort of you know, pushing to the sides that low-grade, low-quality housing that you refer to. There's no shortage of talent, and without wishing to sort of tread on the toes of the developer, you know, one of the groups that I'm part of is an Architects Action for Affordable Housing campaign, again with Felicia and others in the room, and we published a Good Homes for All magazine, and I won't name the partner because they're a competitor to Christine's, but Architects Action for Affordable Housing you can look up, but it shows how, you know, there are the examples out there. There is the talent there. There is the quality that local authorities can deliver, or at least champion through design reviews or through joint ventures, perhaps, to make sure that we do ensure that we're building for the long term, we're building high quality, that sustains, that endures, that meets the needs of a community. And the other, I mean, the point about affordable housing, often working for local authorities, that we're designing directly with the communities we're serving. It's not speculative, so we can have those conversations with the residents that we're having to cater for, which lends a lot of opportunity for design nuance and very responsive design.
We don't have competitors, only allies and friends when it comes to journalists. So I'm going to open up for questions. So if there are questions in the floor, as you germinate some of the things that you hear, I'll just ask Alex, you wanted to speak about building safety and what that's done, and maybe Peter does too. So would one of you like to speak to what you've seen in those few years?
Start with that. Oh, where to go?
Just like it's cathartic. It's like the end of the day. just let us hear it.
Well, we're all fully behind the objectives here. You know, I've been watching the Netflix documentary on Grenfell, and it's so heartbreaking. I can't. It's sort of beyond words to think that our industry almost colludes and conspires to create housing that is that, or leaves residents that vulnerable. So, look, we're all, I think, wanting to find the right route and path to deliver more safe and secure buildings. But the reality is the regulator haven't got the capacity to process the applications that are going through it. I don't know the statistics, but they're well short of the targets. And it has led to a real sort of slowdown in the delivery. And we've seen it from a very personal perspective in the practice. You know, projects that have just went on hold a year and a half ago and only just starting to come back. So there is a problem. There's a problem there in terms of the building safety regulator sort of being able to do what it was set up to do. I don't have the solution or answers to how you deal with that, other than maybe more resource, but also maybe clearer systems, because we haven't for a while known what's expected of us in our applications, or even for a whole year and a half, we didn't know what guidance we were designing to. So, give it time, that might work its way through the system. But it's clearly a problem, certainly in London, in terms of our ability to deliver.
Well, I was just going to add to that, clearly there's this cut-off of 18 metres. The work of our practices tends to be street-based housing. It tends to be rather high density, despite the fact that it's not tall, and that a very efficiently used site where the site is full with small muses cutting through the buildings which are perhaps 5 and 6 stories high rather than 8 or 10, is a very practical solution in terms of that act, but also it does some good things in terms of spatially. And, we're getting jobs at the moment where people are coming and say, well, we've got this project, it's never going to happen because it's 8 stories high. Can you get the same number of homes with 5 or 6? And often we can, with just really efficient use of the site and sort of more intimate public space, which in my view is a positive. So there are designs, there are ways that design can assist in this.
When you speak to that positive, around the smaller muses and the smaller alleys, is that a positive in terms of sociality on the site?
Yeah, that's our view. I mean, I think the street is the basic building block of the city, for my money, and a lot of contemporary development, I think the buildings are very big. There's too much space between them. I like to be in a city where the street is bringing people together, and I think a very positive way of thinking about public space is that it does that. It brings rich people and poor people, people from different racial groups, social groups, different ages together, and so I think that's a very positive way of thinking about housing. We design housing in a city like London. 70% of all the buildings in London are housing. It's what our city's made of, and so the space between buildings, it's a cliche, isn't it, in a way, but and I think very often, if you think about the most valuable real estate in this city, it's often on the narrowest streets, whether you're down in Chelsea or up in Hampstead. So these are the sorts of things we try to replicate, because we think they add to the value of the development, but they also deal with the issue of quite high density at rather low rise, and also the social the possibilities of spaces like that.
Spaces between the buildings is not a cliche, it's our catchphrase. So which of you, I use it all the time. So there is a question over here. We've got a roving microphone. It's coming to you.
Thank you very much for a really interesting, kind of positive talk. I'm really conscious that we have to deliver a huge number of new homes in a very, very short amount of time. And I'm really concerned about the quality of the place that will result. The measure of success of any of this will be on the basis of how people experience that space. And it was really, really reassuring to hear Yemi talk about, people-focused, grassroots kind of development, leading development. But I also hear a reference from Peter about post-war development and as an exemplar for fast and efficient housing delivery, and actually a lot of those spaces really suffered from poor place. So I suppose my question to the panel is, what is the one key thing that we should be focusing on while delivering all of this housing?
At speed and at density, presumably.
At speed and at density, yeah.
Yemi, I'm giving that one to you.
The first thing that came to mind until you said at speed was people. I think ultimately it comes down to people, not only engaging with the community, but I find that when you can have positive partnerships, because that's what it's all about, and relationship, and ensuring that there's alignment, even when we are working with the private sector, ensuring that there is some alignment there in what we're trying to achieve, and that we are generally, not always, all on the kind of same page about what the mission is, vision, how we might get there. So I think relationship and people at all sides of it, in process, when we procurement, how we're meeting with as an architect, I love contracts in a way that kind of drove me to the private sector, but understanding that no matter how beautifully we draw things, we do need guidelines for how we develop. And then it's that relationship you have also with people on the ground. So I love being on site. I spend a lot of time on site. And it's when I'm on site, I understand where things are going wrong, because I've built that relationship with the developer. And then we can go through and understand issues and fix them whilst we're on site as well. So in all things, I think it's about people in the heart of it, and making sure that we have constant relationships and conversations with people on site, not just at the beginning of the process, but even now that we're in construction, we're meeting with local community groups to understand how the developments are affecting them, understand how things can be better, because we're on a 25, 30-year program, and we want to learn from what we're building now and make it better in the future. So people, 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 and when it comes to at speed, I think it's looking at a multiple of kind of different tenures, different ways of building things, rationalising how we're building, more MMC. Yeah, so I just don't think there is just one way of doing it, but I think at the heart of it, for me, is always pushing people and relationships.
Do we have another question from the floor? If not, then I would just ask, I mean, Peter and Alex, actually, it is quite a good exercise to look at one thing to improve place. And you've, I think, Peter, you are the one who mentioned post-war, potentially. But I think this idea of, you know, you are working at density, not always necessarily at speed, but also you are working on quite tight sites. You're working at high density with those kind of narrow spaces. How do you create a kind of adequate sense of space and place? And, you know, are there essential elements for you to that? Perhaps the front door. I feel like you're going to say something about front doors, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, actually another advantage of this kind of housing is its efficiency. Because when you build a block of flats, you know, 30% of your space is corridors, it's stairs, it's lifts, it's spaces that have to be lit and maintained and cleaned. When you do the kind of projects that we do, where there are front doors along streets, maybe double stack maisonettes, there's very little common area circulation. So your £4 million block of flats, if it's 25% less floor area because there's very little common area circulation, it costs £3 million. So there's an impetus there. So there's a commercial imperative, but there's also, as you say, Christine, the potential for people to have direct access into their homes from the street. So, and it seems to me that a street is always going to be a better space for people to socialise than any corridor or lift or deck. And so the commercial imperative and the social ones kind of coincide, which I think is why we're quite in demand and been quite successful at a small scale in our practice, because there's a sort of alignment between a certain idealism, but also an understanding of the sort of commercial realities of development, the per square meter kind of mindset.
Some of your projects worked on a larger scale, Alex. How are you solving that issue of place? And also, you know, speaking to that idea of density and the sense that density can be the antithesis of placeness.
Well, I think Peter's made a really pertinent point, which is about considering the journey from street to front door, which for me works at any scale if you consider that user experience. But I think one thing that's worth, I suppose, facing head on is the car. That I think plays into your question about place creation. If we continue to rely on and be dominated and let the car dominate our public spaces, and take over as much land as they do, then we're not going to get sort of good density. We're not going to be building in the right places for a start, because we just assume we can drive to these places. So you're then not connecting housing with employment opportunity. You're not connecting housing with social infrastructure, with retail infrastructure, and so on. So actually, if you could kind of reimagine journeys of how we get to and from places, either foot, bicycle, or public transport, then actually that perhaps gives us another lens to look at place creation through and think about the merit of good density to then drive, because there's no point just pushing density if it doesn't enable people to have access to employment opportunity or access to local services or the social infrastructure that makes for a good life. So maybe just by almost taking the car out of the equation, it forces us to look differently, both at where we build and what we build.
I mean, in this push to build and to create more social housing, you know, there is the carbon output of that construction, the sense that the carbon budget that we have remaining will be used up quite quickly if we build at the scale or speed that is being demanded for by the urgency. I mean, do you want to speak, or someone want to speak to low carbon construction, or to that kind of tension between using up the carbon budget and the need to build homes?
Well, I just an opportunity to talk about empty homes, maybe. The most efficient home from an ecological perspective is one that exists already. And is it there are 500,000 empty homes in this country at the moment? That's got to be pretty quick to sort out, and it's got to be pretty ecological to sort out. So, and I think that starts to make us think about housing policy in relation to other areas of policy, because many of those homes are in parts of the country where there isn't work. You know, depopulated areas in northern industrial cities reliant on, you know, the fishing industry, steelworks, and so on. And so I think, again, another job for government would be to try to start thinking about investing in new kinds of industries in these parts of the country to attract people back into these areas and bring whole neighbourhoods which are depopulated, boarded up, back into use. And what could be better than that?
And Yemi, you spoke about, you know, at Meridian Water, the council agglomerating land together. Do councils have the powers they need in terms of empty homes to make them into viable homes?
So I think we have huge, when we talk about the financial position that councils are in at the moment, one of the biggest strains is temporary accommodation, actually, in what we do there. So it's been, I don't think we have all the powers that we need. And then once you have the powers, then you need the resource to be able to enforce, which is then another issue, given all the strains that local authorities are in at the moment. So again, it's looking for trying to look for creative ways that we deal with the deficit and stop reliance on hotels, which there has been quite a lot of. So councils and I know Enfield as well have been putting lots of attention into it coming down again to more homes, finding more homes and making better use of homes, and purchasing actually also a lot of homes in order to house people that desperately need them.
Alex, you look like you wanted to add to that, were you?
Yeah, I wanted to look at a slightly different angle on the carbon equation. There are two components to it, obviously embodied carbon and operational carbon. I think once you start looking at operational carbon, there's both environmental benefits of designing passive solutions, as are the social benefits. So at Agar Grove, our scheme for Camden, one of the largest passive house schemes in the country, actually the objective there, even though Camden have declared climate emergency and are pushing that objective of mitigating climate impact, actually the initial driver, and we learned this very personally from conversations with residents that we were housing, the initial driver was actually reducing fuel poverty. Camden, as a landlord, are accommodating residents who can't afford their heating bills. And that comes back to sort of bite in terms of Camden as a landlord. So there's a real win-win in terms of reducing operational carbon through passive measures. I think passive house could be the norm or should be the norm. There are obviously other ways of reducing operational carbon, but it seems effective as far as we can see. You know, some residents don't even bother putting on their top-up heating in winter. But the embodied carbon, I think, is the elephant in the room that isn't being resolved in housing. And that's part of the problem with building safety. There's a sort of risk aversion to timber construction that's becoming more and more common in across Europe. Obviously sequesters carbon, it's regenerative material, it's a sort of attractive means of reducing our embodied carbon. So we've got a long way to go and not enough time to get there in terms of reducing our embodied carbon footprint.
I have time for questions from the floor. Oh yes.
Hi, that's been really interesting, thank you. Just an observation, I'd be interested to hear, while we're having this conversation about housing. My understanding is technically in this country, if you looked at all the housing stock and the number of rooms, there's actually enough space for everyone. But people are all in the wrong type of housing. Like my own parents, there's 2 of them, they're in a 4-bed house. I would like to encourage them to move, downsize, but unfortunately that's their one asset. It's intrinsically linked to their wealth. So they're holding on to it. People are living much longer, which means these assets aren't being passed down quick enough. And something I'm seeing myself happening is that actually, historically, people who would class themselves as middle class would have these assets. They would pass away, that wealth would be passed on to their children and give them a head start. But as people live longer, their healthcare costs cost more, which can erode their asset, which means there's nothing to pass on, which means their children may not have the ability to live the same standard as them. And actually, with living standards falling, more people may actually drop down social class for the first time, since kind of post-war, and that will have a huge impact on social housing. It's like slowly happening. I can see, I live in Birmingham, I kind of see this happening in a way where people who were depending on inheritance might not get it. And if they don't get it, they'll go from thinking that they have one standard of living, and quite quickly they'll be into another. And then if they have a family, it will fall again. And that then in itself is linked to the fact that the birth rate's falling and people aren't having as many children. There's like a huge societal thing happening here. And how are people, digesting this? Are you seeing this change? Because for me, I feel like, government doesn't hold all the money anymore. It's not like 100 years ago. All the money is with institutions. And all they want is return. But for return, they want your covenant. They want to own you. And it's a massive challenge.
I mean, that is a heck of a question to put to someone.
I was feeling a bit tired. I thought I need to go big.
Well, can I just say something?
Yes.
Because, what you're describing is sort of labyrinthine kind of codependencies between different areas. But if we were more reliant on social housing, and if, so is it in Vienna where 50% of people still live in social housing, where it's what everybody where everybody wants to be? It's not a question of kind of slipping down the social scale. This is an aspiration, and we could be like that. We don't have to be, oh my God, I need my parents to die so I can buy a house. Yeah. So, I honestly think it's where I started today, and I honestly think it's the solution.
I think linked with that as well, I think it's this concept that we must all own homes. And I think in other parts of the world, renting isn't looked down on. And I think we've got a huge problem in this country in private, affordable, rented homes, as well as the more traditional kind of models of affordable rent. And I think that's why, again, to Alex's point at the beginning, we need lots of different tenures in relation to affordable housing. And I think they also need to come with things like the rent reform, which I think you touched on as well, so that there's stability there in that market. So I think kind of moving the mindset away from wealth being attached only to ownership is also a long way going. But in order to do that, there are lots of reforms needed, and we also need to build different types of housing to allow for that to be achievable. And
Professor Sir Michael Marmot shared this morning that the number of people who are spending over 40% of their income on rent in the UK, and just that sense of, Obviously social rent is much lower, but that's the reality of the private rental market, which makes it impossible to be preserving any wealth or even to be living at a decent standard with all of it going to private rent. So huge reform needed. There was one more question, I think, over here. Is that right?
Hi, it's Susie from Gottscott. It was actually a potential prompt to the last labyrinthine question.
Are you answering the labyrinthine
Well, I was
question?
just going to say one of the first things this morning was about later living, and actually viable, actually genuinely attractive, pleasant places for older people to move on to, and how that would have an effect on the general economy and housing stock, and whether or not, I was sort of really directing it to you, Yemi, but it's like, in policy terms, that's often not part of the planning policy. It's like left as a commercial kind of offer. It's another product. And I'm not seeing that in planning policy, that it's kind of baked in. So I just wanted to discuss.
Well, I am not the local planning authority, so cannot speak for planners. But again, I think it does talk about looking at delivery holistically and not just on a singular pot basis. And it's something when you have when you've managed to amalgamate large of land like we have at a project like Meridian Water, we can look at things holistically in that kind of timeline as well. So not just more standard affordable housing, but also PRS, also student accommodation, also later living rent, also educational facilities as well. But I think the difficulty is when you look at things on kind of in a piecemeal manner rather than kind of master planning things holistically, and that's where we have had help with the likes of May on earlier versions of our master plan to really look at things like that at that level and that scale, because it's really required.
Well, I think that comes to the end of our session. So if we did not solve the problem of social housing, I hope you appreciated the frank, honest conversation that you heard here from this panel. Can we thank them, please? This concludes the program. There is a drinks reception upstairs. Do please come and say hello, and we'll continue the conversation. Thanks all for being here.